want to show you some basics on protein and muscle. So, as many of you know, we've got this amazing fitness convention, and walking around I see a lot of aerobic activity. It's cardio, people cycling, there's the dancing class going on. There's actually 2 big dancing classes happening right here. And this is cardio, as we know, is very important. And when we are seeing a patient in the clinic, we recommend they do some type of cardio exercise for the heart, for the circulation, very important. But for the first time in history in the United States, the doctors in America are now recommending resistance training, strength, 2 days a week. We've never recommended this before, especially for women, for their muscle metabolism and for their bone health. So much of what I'm going to be talking about, we know that cardio is important. We encourage people to walk, to do cycling exercises, to do swimming, biking. But what we're going to talk about here a little bit is protein recommendations and resistance training. And I have about 30 minutes, I think, so we'll do it quickly and we'll have time for some of your questions. So, we know there are 3 types of muscle, right? And what we're talking primarily about is skeletal muscle. Probably have a pointer here, let's see. So, skeletal muscle here, which composes most of the muscle in our body. There's, of course, cardiac muscle, which is in the heart, and then there's smooth muscle, which makes up a lot of the internal organs, which helps with blood pressure, regulation, and things like that. So, 3 types of muscle, but really the most important, as it relates to all of you, is skeletal muscle. And it's very unique. Skeletal muscle is actually incredible because it's a very dynamic tissue. And when we look at skeletal muscle, what we're really talking about is the individual cell. So let's say I take a muscle out of my arm and I can thread the muscle off the bone. And when you start to separate the muscle out, it goes to the individual muscle fiber, all the way down to the individual myofibril, which is a cell. It's an individual cell. So that is one unique cell which does a lot of incredible things. Now, the problem with most of, how would I say this? As all of us get older, we live longer. We know that maybe 60 years ago, we had problems with pneumonia, viruses, and bacteria. Now that we have medicine that helps us to live longer, many of us in the room, many of you are going to live to be 80, 90 years of age. So the question is, what kind of life will you have at 90 years of age? One thing's for sure, you will have a lot less muscle if you don't exercise. So muscle tissue is important because as we get older, it's an important part of our functional capability. Muscle is very unique relative to fat. So when we cut into the body, we're doing surgery or we're looking at different tissues, this is what you have just under your skin. This is the uppermost layer of fat that keeps us warm. It's for insulation and energy storage. And I don't care how skinny you are, you have hundreds of thousands of fat cells in your body. You can never get rid of them because they are for our survival. When the winters were really long and there was very little food, we relied on fat. So fat is a very important storage. Muscle is very different. Muscle is more of a living, breathing tissue. And it actually burns a lot of calories. So one thing that we are concerned with is we know at rest, as you sit here in this room, every pound of muscle, I should say half kilo, every half kilo, burns around 14 calories every single day. That means if you sit here for 24 hours, your muscle is burning 14 calories every half kilo. As people lose muscle, it's a bad thing because you're burning less calories. It's like your engine in the car is big and it goes to a smaller engine. And if it's a smaller engine, it's not burning as much fuel. And that means your metabolism is lower. So muscle is very important because it establishes the metabolism in the body. That's why we are so interested in maintaining muscle tissue. Now, for many years, we use a measure called the body mass index. So let's say you come into the gym or a clinic. We take your height, and then we measure your weight. We do a ratio, and we get the body mass index. So here are two brothers, and they have a very similar body mass index. Actually, it's the same, because they're twins. I think they're twins, yeah. But this study was done in England, so I'm not sure. It's a pretty famous study. But when they actually scan the two twins and they look at the fat, it's interesting. They both look skinny. One brother, 9% body fat. The other one, 21% body fat. And we find that the fat is mostly stored in the midsection, and often the muscle is less. So this is important. If I'm talking to him as, let's say I'm a doctor, I'm working with him as a patient, and he says, "Doctor, I have no problems with my metabolism. I look skinny." We measure him, and I say, you're over 20% body fat. You can change that by building more muscle and burning that fat in the midsection. So we still measure you height and weight, but it's much more accurate to scan people on a machine called a DEXA scanner. It's an X-ray, and that's what you see here. This particular study that was done in England became known as the, I don't know how to say it, we call it skinny fat. The skinny fat. Because we found that most people walking around, because of the new diet, the Western diet, right? Hamburgers and Coca-Cola, lots of potatoes, fried. That type of diet promotes fat storage. So even people that we believe are skinny are most likely having a lot of fat storage in the abdominal area. There was a television program in America last week about a doctor who's doing surgery on young men in the war. And he's noticing, he's an American doctor, and in America, when they cut open the abdominal cavity, there's a lot of fat that you have to get through to do surgery. In the Middle East, this doctor was saying, when he cuts open the abdomen, there's no fat because they don't have McDonald's, right? They don't have Coca-Cola. Now, so a lot of the Western diet has influenced our body metabolism. And it causes a lot of problems with diabetes. So what we want to do is promote muscle, build up the metabolism, and cut down on that visceral fat. We teach a class in the university where we have many 19-year-old men and women. We measure them on the same machine. Even 19 years old, we find 35% body fat. And a lot of the women are very skinny, and they think this is impossible. But it's the proportion. They have a little bit of fat in there that they can't see, and when they have very little muscle, the proportion of fat is higher. So it's very important at this fitness convention, they're promoting healthy muscle in women. It's a very important concept. Not only is it important now, but for the young women and men, 50 years down the road, it promotes healthy bones and metabolism and heart. So I forget which slide this is, but. So, good. So getting in shape is important because it's really a balance of metabolism. So a lot of doctors in America always focus on weight. How much do you weigh? We need to know how many kilos. And we find that the kilos are not as helpful as the shape. So one thing that I find is when I'm in clinic, let's see, I see a father. He has 3 children. He tells me, I have problems with my sugar. I have diabetes. And I ask him, well, how much do you weigh now? And how much did you weigh 15 years ago? And they often say, oh, well, I haven't changed much. I've noticed my belt. It's getting a little bit bigger. But I'm only maybe 5 kilos more. 3 kilos. And they think no problems. Actually, what's happened is they've added 3 kilos of weight, but in the 15 years, they've lost a lot of muscle. They're busy with the family, with the children. They don't go to the gym. They have no time to exercise. And so this changed a lot of the metabolism. So we know, especially when people start to, when they have their families, they don't have time for activity. The activity is much less. And if they're eating too many calories, especially with the new Western diet, fast food, then their metabolism changes. And we know that this is a big problem. So, what about fitness? Well, we know exercise is amazing because many of you, you're all young in this room. I see all these young people. But even if you're 70, 80, 90 years of age, there's plenty of research that shows it doesn't matter how old you are when you start exercising. You'll get great benefits. Obviously, for the muscle tissue is what we're talking about. And in the individual muscle tissue, the training benefits affect the sugar, the insulin, all the hormones in the body have signals through the muscle. Now, let's talk about practicality. Let's talk about training, because I see a lot of exercising going on in the fitness convention. You have to understand, all of you in your muscle fibers, in your muscle tissue, this is what it looks like inside, all of your muscle. And all of the movement in your body, all of the movement is based on basic proteins. And this is exactly, if you took your arm muscle or your leg muscle, this is what you'd see. You'd see proteins in the red and the proteins in the green. And they sit side by side. One's called actin and one is called myosin. So these 2 proteins, they sit close together. And when you're doing, let's say, a squat or an arm curl, the muscle tissue slides together. And it slides together. These 2 proteins, see that little red bridge? They make a bridge and it pulls together the muscle. That's how you actually shorten your muscle tissue. Okay. So there are two proteins that work together. Now, there's two different types of exercise though. You'll see this man here. He has the weight in the resting position, and he pulls the weight up. The muscle fiber is shortening, and it's developing force. This is an important part of the exercise, but it has very little to do with muscle growth. The way that you get stronger when you exercise is the exercise going from this position down. When the muscle fiber lengthens with force development. We call this the lengthening contraction. So when you're doing exercises, whether it's arm curls or you're doing aerobics, it's the exercise when you step forward and the muscle tissue lengthens is when you see these proteins stretching across each other, breaking these bridges, and you get local damage and inflammation. This is what you do every single day you exercise. You're damaging the muscle fibers. And then you go to sleep at night. When you're sleeping, your brain says, we need to repair the muscle fibers that have been damaged. So you wake up the next day and you've actually have stronger muscles. This is the way that your body fixes itself, right? And this is the way training occurs. So when you're actually doing training, think about the exercise, what we call the positive and the negative. The positive contraction is very important, but the negative is one of the most important exercises which grows the muscle tissue. And this research was done many years ago here in Russia. And this is why many of the best training techniques, many of the best athletes come from Russia and the Eastern European countries, because you were the first ones to figure out these training techniques. So, one of the things that is very popular in America right now is exercises called plyometrics. I don't know how this is going to, I see you guys, you know plyometrics. Plyometrics are very simply when people stand up on something and then they jump down, right? And what are you doing when you jump down? You're stretching the muscle fibers, causing those fibers to damage and break, and you can actually create incredible power in the muscle tissue, causing repair, and you get stronger much faster. So these are very popular. Russians were doing plyometrics many years ago, and it's becoming popular for us right now. Now, you see here, we talked about the negative contraction. What happens in your muscle tissue when you're doing that? The muscle fiber, after it's damaged, when you're sleeping, you have cells called satellite cells. And they individually go to these, remember the muscle fiber is one cell. And these satellite cells come to repair it. And what they do is, because there's a local inflammation, it's hot, it's damaged, the satellite cells come to repair. And if there's sufficient protein in the body, they make the muscle tissue stronger. This is basically how training adaptations occur. Now, a lot of women, they always say, listen, I don't want to lift a lot of weights. I'm going to get very big, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. I don't want to look like, you know, a big man. That doesn't happen with women. Because women have a specific hormonal makeup, you have more estrogen, you'll never look like a man. If anything, you'll have nice muscle definition, but the hormonal changes will not be like a man's changes. Men, we have more testosterone, so it's easier for us to build muscle faster. That's why men can, in 1-2 weeks, they can get very big quickly if they're doing training. But the idea is very important. The lengthening contraction here in the muscle tissue, that negative, and having sufficient protein. So, the diet is so important. You can do all the training you want for 2 or 3, 4 hours, but if you do not have a proper diet, it will not help the muscle repair. So, obviously protein, very important. When we're working with people, we promote lots of protein. We think the recommendations, the international recommendations, are based on starvation. So, in every country, the government recommends the minimum amount of protein so we don't starve. That's not good for a sportswoman or a sportsman. You need to have more protein if you want to build and strengthen. So, protein's important. Fiber, very important. For thousands of years, our bodies are adapted to having a diet high in fiber. Lots of fruits and vegetables, because that helps with healthy elimination. But we know that most people in the United States, in Russia, they should get 25 grams. They're probably getting 12 or 14 grams. So we're getting maybe half of the recommendations for fiber. So very important, you've got to make sure that you're getting everything from carbohydrates to protein. Fiber is important. One of the things we recommend is if you're eating a lot of protein, get half of your protein from plants, rice, beans. If you like complex carbohydrates like pasta, we recommend a lot of soybean because we use that in some of our meal replacement shakes. It's a very complete protein. Peas, small peas have good amino acids in them. So having a balance, I tell the athletes I work with, they say, well, I like to eat red meat and eggs. But I tell them you can't eat eggs all day. You have to have some vegetables, some plants. So, very important to balance the fiber. And what people need to understand is, if they're not eating sufficient protein, the body will take protein from other parts of tissues. So, everyone here is very conscious about fitness, but when we work in the hospital, we deal with a lot of women with anorexia. And the reason why we have to put them in the hospital, anorexia is a big problem in America because of all the television images of the perfect body, and people have a lot of problems with this. So when we put someone in the hospital with anorexia, the reason we get scared is because they're not eating dietary protein. When they're not eating sufficient protein, the muscle tissue starts to go away. The brain needs sugar, it needs amino acids. So what does the body do? It starts to take protein from the heart. So we can have a very young woman who's 19, 22 years old, and if she has protein being taken from the heart muscle, she can have a heart attack and die. This is why protein is so important. And when we're seeing somebody who has anorexia, we immediately hospitalize them, and we have to feed them amino acids into the body directly. So protein is the most important thing. It's not the fat, it's not the carbohydrates. So that's an extreme example, but the reason I give you that example is if your body does not have sufficient protein, it will take protein from the muscle, from the heart, and it's very dangerous. It's basically what starvation is. So, what are the recommendations? Recommendations are very important in terms of how much protein should we have? Well, We know that there are essential amino acids that you have to eat. But what most of the research shows, and this is again, many of the Russian scientists have been practicing this for years, so this is nothing new for the metabolic specialists here. Having 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilo every day. This is what most of the research shows is healthy for people doing sports. Even if you're not exercising every single day, if you have an active lifestyle, if you have a family with children and you exercise a little bit, very important to have enough protein. The World Health Organization recommends about half of this. They recommend 0.8. That's the minimum amount of protein so that we don't starve, but that's not sufficient. So, what we find is when we get a young woman or a young man, they have problems in the clinic with their metabolism, we increase their amount of protein in the diet, they immediately feel more energy, their metabolism improves. A lot of the times they're doing the proper exercises, but they weren't having sufficient protein in the diet. So, I'm about 95 kilos in weight, 95 kilograms. So I need somewhere between, I usually have about 1.6 grams every day per kilo. So every day I drink a lot of shakes, because the company we work with, we produce millions of shakes. So I'm using my shakes all the time. We were in Spain, I'm traveling with the team. We were meeting with a football club in Spain 2 days ago. In the airport, I'm drinking my shakes. In 2 days, we go to Italy. We're meeting with some swimmers. I'm drinking shakes in the airport. So I need to keep the protein up because even though I'm not exercising, this is very stressful traveling. So even if you're not doing exercise every day, if you live in the city, if you're in Moscow and you're busy and you're stressed with the family, your body's breaking down protein, and you need to have a little bit more than the national recommendation. So 1.2 to 1.6 is safe, it's effective, there's no problems for the liver, the kidney, any of the organs. So, and again, you guys knew this in Russia many years ago. We just figured it out in America recently, and now we're promoting more protein. So, we know that, again, we want to recommend lots of fiber in the foods. This is very important. We've noticed that when we work in different countries, many of the governments in other countries, they don't like meal replacement shakes because they feel, well, there's not a lot of fiber in there. You need to put more fiber. And oftentimes when I'm meeting with, let's say, a government official or a doctor, I tell them, you know, the shakes that we're using, if you're using a meal replacement, do any of you guys use shakes? Do you use a protein shake? Do you drink protein shakes? You guys use protein? Okay. Those of you who supplement with protein shakes, okay. You can add fruit, you can add fiber, you can add vegetables, whatever you like. But making sure that you get your 25 grams, which are mostly, you know, fiber, it's carbohydrate, you have to mix that together with your protein. That gives you a good balance. So you can't just have protein, you need to have healthy fiber as well. So very important. Sugars. This is part of the westernization of the diet. We see a lot of problem with sugars. In Russia, you're one of the biggest producers of wheat. Wheat? Does that translate okay? Wheat? In America, we grow corn. In Asia, they grow rice. So these are the three major carbohydrates in the world. Russia, you're very famous for your wheat exports. You feed a lot of the world wheat. And you have many different types. In America, we're very famous for our farmers making corn because the government supports a lot of the business, corn. Asia, they're very famous for rice. These different carbohydrates, they all break down to sugar, to glucose. So, the problem with the modern diet is you take all these different carbohydrates and we process them into cookies and chips and candies. And when you have a small glucose molecule and you eat it in chips or bread, candies, it causes the blood sugar to shoot up very fast. And that causes a lot of problems because it sets people up for diabetes. So, when we encourage people, if you can have other types of complex carbohydrates, we like to recommend, of course, fruits and vegetables because they have fructose. Fructose is a fruit sugar, and it doesn't go directly into the blood. It has to first pass through the liver and get metabolized, and so it slows down that blood spike that you see in sugar. So, different types, obviously having fruits and vegetables, very important. The reason we mention that is because when I'm working with an athlete, we get their protein recommendation correct, then we need to get the carbohydrates correct. It's very easy, but we want to first correct the protein, then the carbohydrate. So, knowing how much carbohydrate is important, and of course staying away from the simple sugars are very important. I think we're almost finished here. Now, fat is essential. Fats have become much more popular with the marketing of essential oils. So oils that you find in fish are very important in the body. There are certain oils that we cannot make. We can't manufacture them, so you have to eat them. These are what we call the essential fatty acids. And these essential fatty acids, they help the brain and the heart and the muscle tissue. And if you don't have them, you can actually have a lot of problems. So, having essential fats are very important in the body. There are different types in fish, in avocado, in nuts, right? You have long chain fats and you have sort of medium chain fats. The important thing is having the right balance is key to making sure that the body operates correctly. So, you've all heard of the omegas, yeah? The omega-3, those are in fish. The omega-6 fatty acids, this is what you find in corn and wheat. And the omega-9s, which are in, let's say, the monounsaturated in olives, olive oil, and different nuts, and avocado. So, having a good mix of these fatty acids are very important. And we recommend those in the diet. Fats are becoming very important in sports because of the effect on joint tissue. Many athletes have problems with their knees. They get sore knees, hips, shoulders, and that's through inflammation. So if you go to the gym, you're exercising, you get very, let's say, hot, swollen joints from exercising. A way to actually relax the joint tissue and the inflammation is to have the essential oils. This is why people, let's say in Japan, people in some parts of South America, where they eat a tremendous amount of fish, even upwards towards, let's say, Finland, if you go right up towards Finland, and they look at research on people who eat fish all day, lots of fish, they have much less arthritis, especially for those who are doing sports, because eating those oils reduces inflammation in the joints. Now, if you can't eat fresh fish, if they have to fly it in from the very far end of Russia, and you can't get it, and you're not eating a lot of caviar is very high in the omega-3s, then you can take a fish oil capsule. Many companies sell these capsules now, and they take the oil from the fish, they put it in the capsule. So, any way that you can get your essential fats is important for the brain, the heart, but really important for the joint tissue. And I think that's one of the most important things to talk about. So, looking at the diet, I'm going to finish up here in a minute. Well done. We want to take someone who's in this range and move them to this area. Because we know that carbohydrates are everywhere. You can find bread, you can find crackers and chips. A lot of these snacks that are available, they're available because the companies, they make money from them, and they know that we're going to eat them when we're stressed and we want to snack. We need to get away from these foods, from this area, and move more to a diet in this area. This is much better in terms of the ratio of protein, carbohydrates, and fats. Let's see. So basically in review, we know that hydration is important. I see everyone carrying water around here. Everyone's drinking their 2 liters every day, 3 liters if you're doing sports. And of course, much of that hydration is in your food. When you have an apple, that's mostly water. When you're having your vegetables, lots of water content, right? So, remember, hydration is important. Having that important exercise. Remember when you're doing your resistance exercise, especially for the women, it's not just the positive contraction, the negative contraction is very important. So what does this mean when you go to the gym? Well, simply, you can count up 1, and then you slowly count down 3. 1, 2, 3, right? That's basically what you're doing, because when you lift the weights, that's very good for strength, but for growth and repair, it's the lengthening contraction, right? Same thing when you're doing a squat or any type of exercise. Every time you walk down the stairs, you're basically damaging the muscle tissue and making it stronger. Remember, the protein, you will not grow or strengthen your muscle if you're not getting 1.2 to 1.6 grams. Even if you want to be very conservative, we think at least 1 gram of protein per kilo. And one of the most important things is the last slide. Whenever we work with a client, an athlete, sometimes they say, well, my parents they were fat, they were overweight, they had heart problems, so I'm going to have these problems. So that's not true. We know about 30% is determined from the genes, but in each of you, your body is really determined by your lifestyle, your health. So 70% of your health is really determined by what you eat and the physical activity that you do. A great question. Trans fats are chemically modified fats. And years ago, has anyone ever taken a piece of chicken or potatoes? You fry it in the pan, you put oil in. The oil turns very dark. It gets oxidized. You take the food out after you've cooked the food. You take the oil and you put it in a can because it's dark. The oil is now black. You can't use it. That's natural oxidation of fat, right? Through heating. If you go to McDonald's, I'm saying bad things about McDonald's, okay? McDonald's is a great company. We have no problems with McDonald's. Everything is great, okay? However, if you go to McDonald's and you watch them cook the fries, they can't change the oil every minute. It's impossible. If you look at the oil where they're making the fries at all the fast food restaurants, the oil is always yellow, clear. It looks like it's natural oil, but it's a chemically modified oil, trans fat. So the food industry created these fats so that they can cook many potatoes and many hamburgers, and you can use the same oil all day. And the way that they actually make this oil, they take peanut oil or oil from any vegetable, and they take a metal, like a nickel, like a nickel, like a coin, And they use that metal, they heat the oil up very high, and they add metal to change the structure of the oil. And that's why it's called trans, because the chemical structure changes, so it's very stable at high temperatures. That's the definition. Now, why does the food industry use trans fats? Because you can make a creamy salad dressing, which should be naturally like milk cream. It should go bad in one or 2 days. You can put it on the shelf for 1 year. It doesn't go bad. You can get a piece of chocolate and it tastes very creamy for 3 years. Natural cream goes very bad quickly. So it makes the oil stable, but it's a chemical change. Now, we've been using them for years in the food supply. Recently, we've been finding out when you eat trans fats, they get absorbed into the heart muscle. And once they're absorbed in the heart muscle, they're very difficult to change. And they cause big problems with the membrane of the tissue. So for example, all of you are healthy. You're probably never going to suffer from any heart problems. When someone has a heart attack, they have what's called an arrhythmia. The rhythm of the heart is usually normal. Trans fats, when we eat them, they get into the heart muscle and they cause an arrhythmia. And this causes a heart attack. So in New York, they're illegal now to cook with trans fats. Yeah, so now in America we're starting to take them out of the food supply, but they're so cheap. Many companies, they don't obey the law, they still put them in the food. So the best way to get rid of the trans fats, use fish oil, use obviously your peanuts, any kind of natural nuts that you want to use, avocado. All these oils are very healthy. And what many people now are using is from Malaysia, they're using something called palm oil. Palm oil, like your palm. Palm oil, these big palm trees. They take the oil. It's a natural oil. And you're going to see that in the food supply now. So when you're going shopping, if you see anything that says hydrogenated oil, hydrogenated, that means it's trans fat. Do not buy that product. Look for palm oil. Palm oil is much more natural. In terms of the fat, the metabolism of this fat is very different than this fat. This fat's very dangerous in the abdominal area. And remember, if you go right beneath the skin, there's a layer of fat. And you get to the muscle. You open up the muscle, there's a second layer of fat in Americans and Russians. Okay? If you go to people who are really starving, they don't have the deep fat. The deep fat is very dangerous because it's more metabolically active. The fat cells have a higher turnover. And this fat goes right to the liver. There's a big vein called the portal vein. And this fat turns over faster, and those free fatty acids go to the liver and they disturb everything. So the liver gets very confused, and most people, and this is what's happening now in Russia, when the doctor checks the blood, they take a look at the cholesterol, it's high, all the measures in the blood are they're crazy and they're often wacky. So the doctor says, oh my gosh, it looks like you have liver disease. And they start asking questions, do you have a blood transfusion? Have you been drinking a lot? What's going on? Then they take a picture of the liver with an ultrasound. And the liver is fat. It's called fatty liver. It looks really big. But it's not a problem necessarily with alcohol. It's not a problem with blood transfusions. It's the fat in the midsection, which goes to the liver. So this fat's very dangerous. When we reduce the calories, really to about 1,500 calories every day, men we can go maybe a little bit more, but we target women 1,200 to 1,500, men 1,500 to 2,000. They start losing weight and the fat here. Within 2 weeks, we see big changes. And then when we wait 2 months, the liver shrinks. The fat around the liver goes down. We check the blood, it's normal in just 8 weeks. So this fat is very dangerous. This fat is actually healthy. Women tend to carry more fat here in the hips because it's protective for childbirth. When they get pregnant, when they're ready to have a baby. So we call the fat in this area is actually protective. Now, we don't want people to get really fat here, but having a healthy amount of fat actually reduces the risk of breast cancer and other hormone-related diseases. So we believe women and men, but women should be very careful of this fat and not worry too much about this fat. It's healthy. It's protective. So, cutting the calories by 500 calories every day. The most important thing. That's the change in the different types of fat. And then you asked about salts. Salt, if you don't have high blood pressure, salt is not a problem. The only issue with salt is that if someone is sensitive, salt retains fluid in the body, which is why we put people on a low sodium diet, which is 2 grams. 2 grams of salt every day. If we go, and that's very hard to get. Most of the foods that we eat, they're heavily salted for preservatives. So if you can find, if you're eating your normal diet, you're cooking a lot of your own food, you don't add a lot of salt, you're going to stay somewhere around 2 to 3 grams. No problem. But for everyone in the room here, unless you have very high blood pressure, salt is not a problem. Especially with athletes, people who are working out all the time, you lose a lot of salt. That's what regulates your body water. Your kidneys change the salt balance. So keeping salts in your body is important. And if you exercise a lot, salts are key. So I never worry about salts with my patients unless they have very high blood pressure. Thank you. It's a great question. A great question. If you're going to consume protein, I prefer both, before and after. Because if you consume some protein before, it will help with the recovery. But the most important time, if you're going to choose one, it's after exercise. So let's say you exercise for 1 hour here at the fitness convention. The best time is immediately after you finish. Consume protein. If you can get it in, so let's say you get it in a protein shake, cold, faster absorb, you have cold fluids, the body likes cold fluids after exercise. If you mix protein with some carbohydrate in the right ratio, it will get into the body and the muscle tissue faster. So this is the key. After you exercise, you consume protein and carbohydrate. It stimulates a hormone called insulin. You all know insulin. And insulin is the storage hormone. It opens up the doors in the tissues to get the protein into the muscle. It drives those amino acids in. And so then, when you go to sleep, your body can start to repair that muscle tissue very well. The repair is happening. So really, within 2 hours after exercise is the most important time. But even more important, within 30 minutes after you finish exercise. That's when you really have that crucial time. So 30 minutes is best after. If you can't get it in 30 minutes, then 2 hours. Make sure you get it within 2 hours. And if you can get it in, let's say, a shake that's cold with 20 grams of protein, perfect.
Some people cannot live without
So yes, there's a reason why humans, we like sweets. We have, you have receptors on your tongue for sweet. So thousands of years ago, you didn't have a lot of sweets available. You would find some berries or some, different, let's say a melon, something sweet. But most of the things were plants and animals, not a lot of sugar. So we are very well adapted to having a little bit of sweets from fruits and absorbing those sweets very well. Now, the food companies, they put a lot of sugar, because remember, it's easy to grow sugar. You have lots of wheat in Russia, that's glucose, right? Bread is just glucose. Then you have a lot of corn in America and rice. This is mostly sugar. So the world has no problem having sugar. We have 7 billion people on the planet right now. We have plenty of food to feed everybody. Okay? In fact, when you look at the number of people starving in the world, it's gone down less than 1 billion. It's 850 million. And now the number of people who are overweight in the world has gone up to 2 billion. So 30 years ago, we were like, wow, we have people starving in Africa and Asia. Now that's going down because we have so much sugar. We're sending sugar everywhere. That's not good, though. We're causing a big problem. People have gone from starving to diabetes to early death from heart disease. Right? So sugar is abundant everywhere. The key is to control the amount of sugar and choose the right types of sugar. So remember we talked about fiber? The best way to get your fiber and your sugar is from fruits and vegetables. So finding, you have lots of fruits here in Russia that you can choose from. What I recommend is finding a good protein source. I like to use a shake, and you add the fruit into your protein, so you have your balance. So you can have your sweets. Many people don't like artificial sweeteners. You know, artificial sweeteners, like if you get a Diet Pepsi or a Diet Coke, they have artificial. So people are turning away from that. In America, we have a big revolution now. Mothers with children don't want to buy diet sodas anymore for the children because they think it causes problems. And they believe that the kids are becoming hyperactive and the problems in their brains. So now, in America, they're turning back to normal sugar, regular glucose and fructose. So I think here in Europe, Russia, throughout the region, you're going to see a big consumer revolution. It starts with the women, because the women spend the money in the market. It's true. Men, we don't shop for food, right? The women shop for food. So you vote with your money. So if you stop buying Diet Coke, like they did in America, then Coca-Cola says, uh-oh, why are women not buying Diet Coke? Oh, they don't want the artificial? Okay, we're going to go back to classic Coke with normal sugar. And you're going to see a lot of food companies adding sugar, normal sugar. With protein, let's say I'm getting 160 grams every day, for example. I can't just eat meat, steak, eggs, steak. It's not healthy for my heart. So half of the 160 grams for me, maybe even 180. So I'm eating 80 grams of meat, protein, a steak, chicken, fish, and then 80 grams from vegetables, rice, beans, and I drink shakes with soybean. So let's say when you eat rice, rice has half of the amino acids that you need. So many people take rice and they combine them with beans, red beans, black beans, or corn, because that's the other half of the amino acids. So you mix rice and corn, rice and beans, you get a complete amino acid profile. Does this make sense? Because your body needs all those amino acids. Soybean by itself has the entire set of amino acids. So it's the full complement, and we call it a complete protein. There are other complete proteins in plants, but usually you have to combine two of them, rice or pasta and all these different things. So you're going to see a lot of sports shakes. They have them out here in the fitness area that use different, either milk protein, milk is complete, but some of the plant proteins have to mix the two. So you're going to see different mixing blends. Soy has everything together. That's the reason.
Do you recommend different diets when you're doing cardio exercise?
Correct, yes.
Is there a difference? Cardio and strength exercise diets.
So, very important. So first of all, cardio, when you think cardio exercise, running, and let's say a marathon runner, pure cardio, a swimmer, a cyclist. If we follow that athlete from the age of 20 to the age of 60, you guys tell me when I need to stop. Or you know, tell me when I need to stop here. Well, okay. So we follow that athlete from the age of 20 to 60. We notice that the muscle fibers shrink more and more and more and more. So if you take a strong man, let's say in Russia, you have lots of famous strong men, right? Olympic athletes. We take that athlete, we follow them. Their muscle tends to be big over time because they're doing resistance training. They don't have a lot of fat. This is why you see them, they're so lean, no fat anywhere. Because the type of exercise that they're doing, the resistance training, doesn't shrink the muscle fiber. Cardio actually shrinks the muscle fiber over time. That's why we think if you're doing cardio, you must also incorporate resistance training. So all of the Olympic athletes now, if they're running the marathon, everything they do, you're going to see them lifting weights because it's going to improve their performance. So first of all the endurance runners are now lifting weights. Swimmers, the swimmer who just won the 8 gold medals. What's his name? I was going to say Gross. Phelps. I was going to say Gross, but Phelps. I was thinking of the German swimmer. So Phelps, you look at his training regimen. He's a big guy, huge. He does a lot of training with weights. He's swimming 10,000 meters. But his endurance performance is helped by his muscle strength training. Now, foods, obviously carbohydrate is the most important thing for performance during the race. So, without going into too much science, think of you have a car, you fill up the car with gasoline. That gasoline lets you go a certain distance. It's the same thing when you exercise. You're out there doing your aerobics, or you're doing a spin class. You have sugar in the muscle tissue, and it starts to run out like gasoline. It's running low. The beauty of doing aerobic exercise is when you exercise and you eat more sugar, your muscle and your liver can store more sugar. So it's almost like, imagine in your car, the gas tank gets bigger. And it's called a loading, carbohydrate loading. And this is why the night before a marathon, people eat a lot of pasta, right? And they fill up on all that pasta because it goes more to the liver and the muscle tissue. So the most important thing is carbohydrate loading, and there's this very standard regimen that we do.
Спасибо, очень понравилось ваше выступление. Остался такой вопрос.
Это последний вопрос, спасибо большое.
Не только моих клиентов это беспокоит. Например, произошла погрешность в диете. То есть вечером, предположим, вечером съели достаточно большое количество высококалорийную пищу.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. All right. Depends on if you're very fit and you're a well-trained athlete, like many of you here are very fit. I see everyone looks great. That one bad night of eating is not going to hurt you. And this happens all the time. In fact, many athletes, when they finish training for an event, marathon, weightlifting competition, their body is going through a natural cycle, and the body's asking for lots of fat and sugar. And so they go home from the competition, and they get a big thing of ice cream. Because it feels so, the body's saying, give me fat, I need more fats and sugars. That's okay for an athlete. Because what's happening is they have to cycle through a detraining period where they go from very high fitness, maybe down to a low fitness, and then back into a training period. So cycling is very normal for an athlete. So if they eat, sometimes something bad, it's okay. Now, for the average person, it's a problem. This is when I talk to my patients in clinic, and we check their, we're checking their charts, and I say, oh, in 1 month, you gained 3 kilos. And, in America, we have a lot of excuses. Say, oh, I had some pizza, I went to the wedding, I had to go to the party for my children, I had this. So there's a lot of foods that are available. That's very dangerous because they're not exercising every day. And the 3 kilos doesn't go away. The athlete, you burn 3 kilos, if you go up in 3 kilos, you go down, no problem, because you're going through a cycle. So the most important thing the next day is getting into a regimen. That's what I always say. I tell them to start walking 30 minutes. And then try and get them into a program so that long term, over let's say 3 months, they're going to get some changes. But so it's 2 different things. The athlete, no problem. For the normal person, it's a problem. And we need to actually change the diet quickly and get some exercise going for 3 months.